an adventure. So we do not claim that we are the experts in all things writing. So we kind of talk about our journey through writing and publishing, and then we have tips. As we learn them, we share them with our listeners.
Very cool. Chris, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
My name is Chris Lodwig. I am a speculative fiction author as well. My recent book that I've published is called Systemic and is a science fiction novel, sort of an AI utopia / dystopia book, depending on who you ask. And that is my first novel, and that's about it.
Did you write short stories or anything first, or did you jump whole hog into novels?
You know, actually, so I wrote a lot when I was younger, like in college and those sorts of things. And I stopped writing a lot when I got a real job and I got a family and yada, yada, yada. But so I wrote a lot when I was younger. This particular book, I was just on the bus and my phone died and my laptop died. And so I grabbed a pencil and a piece of paper and I started writing a scene in my mind. So I'm like, oh yeah, I used to write. That was fun. And I started writing. And then I wrote some more, and then I wrote some more, and suddenly it was 90 pages. I'm like, oh crap, it's a sci-fi book. I better keep writing this. And then within 9 months, I had a thing. So I didn't really dive into it. I was just like, oh, this is fun, and I was writing and writing and writing, and all of a sudden I had a book. So
that's sort of how my first novel experience was as well. It just sort of like poured out of my brain on my lunch break and on my commute and stuff. And I was like, oh wow, this is a novel.
Yeah, and then I'm like, it's not a bad novel. I should actually, get it edited and do some stuff with it and trying to get it out there. And everything just it was like rolling downhill. It was very easy. Now I have. So there you go.
Wonderful.
Now I write all the time. So
great. You caught the bug, the writing bug.
Yeah. When I tried to stop being when I was young and I was trying to mean something all the time, everything had to be so meaningful. Once I got over that, like I started writing good books.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's a great lesson, a great tip. Stop trying to mean anything. All right, and our third author joining us is Mr. Wes.
Yeah, I'm Dr. Wesley Britton. I've written 11 published books, 4 of which are nonfiction, all about spy television, spy movies, spy books, that kind of stuff. And then I kind of like you guys, all of a sudden out of clear blue, I'm writing a science fiction novel. It just came out of the blue. I was kind of just sitting in my office needing something to do and started fantasizing. And I ended up writing the first 4 books, more or less, before I figured, well, why don't you write this down? Because, I mean, if you're going to have all these characters and places and settings and things, make them books. Well, okay. And I've been doing that. And then all of a sudden, I'm doing more than those 4. Mm-hmm. And so far, and I'm working on a bunch of stories now in different settings and different planets, really. So I'm always world building. So this is a good panel for me.
Fabulous. But first I have to ask, do you have a favorite spy?
Real or fictional?
I don't know that much about real spies.
Are you allowed to say real spies' names?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, as a matter of fact, one of the weirdest accomplishments of my life is a couple months ago, I was interviewed by Al Jazeera on a documentary they're doing on Israeli spy Eli Cohen, who was hung in Syria back in 1965. And it's a really impressive documentary. It's too bad I don't understand any of it except for me. Everybody else on the show is speaking in Arabic or whatever they're speaking.
Okay.
On it, and I can't see the subtitles, so all I know is what I said. That was fun. Fictional spies, well, you got to go back to 007. He's the cornerstone for a lot of us, but there's a lot of spy authors, I got to enjoy over the years. I think Tom Clancy did us good. John Buchan did us good. Graham Greene, Eric Ambler. I can go on and on and on, and I won't.
All right, yes. Let us veer back into sci-fi territory. So I've got some questions for you guys. Wes, maybe just pick 1 or 2 of your books, or like one of your series, if you have a series, so you don't have to tell us about every world you've ever created, but just tell us a little bit about maybe your favorite for whatever reason. And so I want to know if you had to choose just one main difference between the real world and the fictional world of your sci-fi story? What is the main difference? Anybody can jump in first.
Well, from Beta Earth, they were hit by a plague that kills 3 out of 4 male babies their first year. So it's a world based on polygamy well, it has to be.
Uh-huh.
I saw a character from our world, they snatched him. They want some DNA from our line, and maybe we get the cure for their plague. And so there's an unhappy college professor who's pulled over there, and he's blinded in the capture, and he has to adapt to everything that's over there. So I had to introduce all of the other planet kind of through his perspective as he explores it and finds out where the heck he is and what's going on. So do and
but yeah, a lot fewer men. That's a big difference between the real world.
Oh gosh.
All right, Theresa, what about you? What's your main difference?
Telepaths and psychokinetics. That would be the main difference.
Okay, okay, cool. And Chris, what's your main difference?
Well, the main difference of my story is there's a very powerful artificial intelligence, which is kind of a trope. But the thing that's fun about this artificial intelligence is that its main thing that it did when it first came online was start to distinguish between fact and fiction in big news. And so there's actually, unlike today where we are moving further and further away from having a consistent arbiter of truth of what is or isn't real, in the book, that is one of the main things that this system, it's actually called the system for various reasons, does. It says that is true, and it gives it a stamp of veracity that is checkable, verifiable, and so everybody understands what is or is not real. And then after that, the AI started to get involved with public policy and things like that. And as a result, just like Wes's book, there aren't as many people as there once were. As an example of policies that the system is enforcing. And in fact, the name of the book, Systemic, means truthful in the story, because it's things either are or are not systemic. And that is the name where the title of the book comes from. It's about and veracity.
Interesting. Well, that segues nicely, because my next question was going to be about interesting technology that you've created for your world. So obviously, Chris, you've got your AI. Has there been any other technological advances or anything that came out of that?
Yeah, there's lots of transcranial brain stimulation. So, which there's the human systemic interfacing is basically something. It's there's something called the octopus contact rig, which you kind of like pop on your head, and it allows you to sort of do a mind meld with the machine and the AIs, and that becomes a big part of the book. And they say, and it feels like when you put this thing on, that something is flipping through the card files of your mind and looking through and trying to figure things out, and it's a reading writing function, which is kind of makes for an interesting part of the plot that I'm not really going to
yes, you don't need to spoil anything. Don't spoil anything, but that's
important, and it's cool and it's fun. I love it, but I also don't want to give too many things away. So
yeah, cool, interesting. Wes, what's your favorite tech that you have invented?
Well, on Beta Earth, they are a lot more ecologically oriented than we are. There's no use of fossil fuels. There's what they call sojo sheets, because sojo is their word for the sun. So they've got solar panels everywhere, all over the place. They, channel an awful lot of energy, and they have a lot of what they call wind poles, which I can guess what those are. Windmills everywhere. You don't have gas stations, you have wind pole stations where they pull up, hook up to a wind pole, and go hang out and do whatever they want to do while their transits, as I call them, power up, and then they can go. But I think those are the two kind of endure. Well, they're in all the books, because that's what keeps them going.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess that's probably the most unique, I suppose. So it's not a real tech-oriented book. It's more character and culture.
Mm-hmm. Sure. How about you, Theresa? Do these telepath psychics, do they have
They
any cool
do, they
tech?
do. So kind of have to take it back a little bit and just do a little explanation. So there's kind of three classes of people. There's regs, who are like you and me, we're not telepaths or psychokinetics.
That
There's,
you know of.
I know, right?
Oh, Theresa.
There's breds whose genetic codes have been manipulated by their parents to be whatever their parents paid for. And then they're also telepaths and psychokinetics. And then in the general population and the reg population, there are wilds whose genetic codes weren't manipulated, but they have telepathy and psychokinesis. So wilds are really kind of like, we don't want to deal with them. Because, I mean, honestly, you don't want your child to read your mind. So, yeah.
Well, that hurts
I mean,
for them to go to bed and things if they know that it's just because you want to watch a movie and not because they actually need to go to bed.
right. You know, there's all this like layers to it. So I had to create a way to keep these wilds kind of down, kind of arrest them. You know, if they do bad things, they have to like have their abilities locked down.
Yep.
So I created what's called bands, and they're metal that goes around their wrists when they're arrested or in trouble or something like that. And it takes a blood sampling, and then as they're horrific, as they use their abilities, they tighten around their wrist as kind of a warning of, hey, you're using your abilities. The thing is that wilds, you know, I mean, if you can read people's minds, it's kind of there. It's not something that you have a lot of control over. So a lot of the wild adults are walking around with scars on their wrists from having to wear these bands at various points in their life. So
Interesting.
yeah, it's got a kind of dystopian feel to it, even though it is set in today. I've kind of
That was actually going to be
added
my
a little
next
bit of tech.
question. Yeah, it was going to be like, yeah, for everybody, this is open for you to answer. If you hear stories like, are they now? Are they in the past with changes? Are they far in the future? Is it a galaxy far, far away? So Theresa, you were saying it's now-ish.
It's now-ish, yeah. It's you know, basically parallel universe, and it's set in urban Chicago.
Do you have a connection to Chicago?
No, I needed a big city, and I needed a big city. I needed there to be some time zone changes, and I already had kind of San Francisco already locked down for another scene, so I kind of tried to pick something in the middle.
Mm-hmm. Does it have really bad traffic? Because Chicago has really bad traffic.
No,
that's a little bit of realism for you.
So people
Great blues clubs.
Yeah. So these people, they either don't leave where they're at, or they use transport pads, or they can teleport.
Lucky them.
Right. But only some. It's, yeah.
Okay.
Again, like all good sci-fi, it's nuanced.
Right. How about you, Chris? Is your book in the future or?
Yeah, it's in the future. I kind of very purposely punt on how far in the future, and I like to say things like it's several generations into the future, just things like that. And a lot of it that comes from this internal fear that I have that you know, people will read it in 20 years and go, yeah, like that ever happened. So it's like, no, it's in the future, but it's yeah, it has to be multiple generations in the future. For the tech, but mostly because of the environment that exists and the society that exists is not something that would happen in, say, 5 years. It would take, for instance, one of the tech that they have is they figured out we need to drop population. Again, it's not nefarious necessarily; it's just a necessity. So this thing that's always kind of coming up with policies, the system is figured out. You know, just giving everyone birth control doesn't actually help. Like, people suck. We're really bad at that. So they just put it in the water supply, and you can filter it later if you want and have kids. But so you always opt into having children. And for that to take the effect that it needed to build up the world and to have the world as depopulated as it is, and sort of springing back environmentally and the types of things that happen. It just can't happen in like 5 years. It needs to be multiple generations of sort of reasonable, policies to make the world flourish the way that it is in the story. So like the environment flourishes and the cities kind of fall to crap. So
have you ever heard of Life After People?
yeah, it's funny. So that, yes, and the sequel to my book is where I went back and reread that thing and watched. The World Without Us is, I think, actually what I'm thinking. So it's not Life Without People, but it's the same idea. Like, what happens to everything when we all go away?
Yeah.
And so, but that plays much more into the sequel that I'm currently writing because, again, not giving too much away, but the outcome of what happens to all of our concrete buildings when there's no one maintaining them anymore is much more pertinent to the second book than the first. So
cool, interesting. How about you, Wes? Do you your stories as futuristic?
Well, a big chunk of them are pretty much contemporary, parallel, until I got around to doing the second generations. And then I brought some back to our planet. And that's where I'm having an interesting conundrum. We got speculative fiction about our planet in the future. Well, how can you do that anymore without at least some passing mention to the pandemic we're living through?
Mm-hmm.
If you hadn't written about it before, like I got 2 books out on our planet, in 20-some years or so. And the pandemic hadn't happened when those books came out. But now that I've got these short stories and things in the works, well, I'm trying to figure out ways to put that in there and make it interesting. But how do you do that when the pandemic is still ongoing?
Yeah, right. There's a little aspect of too soon.
Yeah, exactly.
I remember seeing a call for short story anthology in like February of 2020, asking for stories about isolation. I was like, oh, does anyone want to read that?
Not now.
That's a little too soon.
Yeah.
Do Chris or Theresa, do either of you have thoughts COVID, just how it's going to affect the future of writing sci-fi and stuff? Do you think you have to mention it? Do you think you can pass it on over?
At least right now in this moment, I think avoiding it's the best because we don't know what's going to happen. And I don't think anyone wants to read about it. So, 5 years from now, depending on kind of what happens, mentioning it, especially if there are, permanent changes to society due to it. But I think right now, I don't think anyone wants to hear about it.
I'm very curious to see about masks, how long-term mask wearing is, because in East Asia, people wear masks. So we're already wearing masks pretty regularly before. And so I'm curious to see if that's going to stay with us for longer than some of the other things. I know I'll probably continue carrying hand sanitizer. I never did that before, but
well, it's interesting because a lot of the social mores in the past, like we didn't shake hands up until recently, and everybody wore gloves, and there was more kind of social distancing that was natural. You didn't go up to people and hug them. That's unless they were family. That's again a relatively recent thing. It may be that we see that change coming back again, that we kind of almost in some ways go backwards.
Yeah.
I have kind of a funny situation because I have a puppy and he's adorable. And so I now have gotten to know all kinds of neighbors that I've never spoken to before, partially for the language barrier because I'm in Germany, and partially just because I'm outside all the time now. So I see people, but yeah, like I don't want to tell them don't pet my puppy. Right. Yeah. And he loves people. He runs right up to them. But so this is a weird kind of social space now that I've entered as well. With like, I have this thing that everybody wants to touch. But yeah, I've been wondering a lot about what we're going to see with the future of entertainment. Partially, even just like the working from home phenomenon. If we're going to see, because like the writer's room, for instance, for a television show, being in the same room with each other has been a big part of television writing for a long time. But Are we going to see more independent, like single writer shows? Are we going to see video conferencing? I'm very curious about how it's going to affect the industry of writing, because novel writing is pretty
Solitary.
solitary, yeah. But some of these other mediums
Or more collaborative.
right?
Yeah.
Right.
No, I think it's true. I think as far as the pandemic, I mean, on one level, there will be an immediate effect. I think about things like the 1918
Right.
pandemic. We don't talk about that. I mean, we do now, but it's like, 2 years ago, I wasn't like thinking about how the 1918 pandemic changed my life.
Mhm.
And so it didn't really make its way into the writing. But I think that things like this, they become part of the sort of substrate and the anxieties of society. So you're going to see a lot more, say, zombie novels, and you're going to see a lot more pandemic dystopian novels, and you're going to see that stuff because that's what people are internally processing.
Yeah.
I think that there's going to be a lot of that, and I'm my second book right now. One of the things I was going to do is like, let's have a plague, and then I was like, that was in February, and then in March I'm like, let's not have a plague. So maybe it'll have the opposite effect, and we'll actually have fewer zombie novels and plagues because everyone's like, it's a bit on the nose.
Yeah.
Or if we were anxious about what the pandemic flu was going to look like, we're like, oh, now we know.
Now we know a lot
Bunch
more.
of people on a cell phone, on a Zoom call with a mask on, like that's what it looks like.
Yeah. Yeah, I
For me,
definitely remember
gotta
reading
integrate it because my future world, we get hit with wave after wave of weaponized plagues from jihadists, which really transforms our planet in the future. And they were all inspired by the pandemic to the point where people will look back and see this pandemic as kind of the gentle plague.
I say this is pandemic on the easy level. We
Yeah.
have easy level pandemic right now. Like it could definitely be harder, and we're not doing a very good job at this one.
Well, that's for sure.
Yeah. We're playing on the easy level and failing.
Failing miserably.
Yeah. It would be curious to see if there's more books about like being trapped, you get trapped in your house or you're trapped in your bedroom by, somebody coming in, you're trapped on a spaceship, it's exploding around you or something like that. To kind of that feeling that everyone has of like, I'm trapped in my house.
Right.
Yeah.
That might be an interesting thing. Isolation. Yeah.
Yeah.
I also remember at some point a while ago, I read an article about how like when people's spirits are high, that's when you see more horror and drama being produced. And then when people feel bad, that's when you see more comedies and things, because you want you can't cope with as much drama and stuff in your entertainment if it's going on in your real life. And so who knows, maybe we'll see a lot more lighthearted.
Is that a statement about production or consumption? So I would be curious to know, like, I think that's true. Like people watch more comedies, I know I have, but are they producing a lot of really dark stuff that just no one's reading or looking at or watching? Like, I would love to see the consumption versus production.
That would be, those two graphs would be really interesting to see.
Yeah, they would.
All right, well, let's bring it on back to you guys' work now rather than the hypothetical future. So we talked about tech. I'm also curious, does anybody have any interesting creatures that they created as part of their sci-fi world?
Just a really cute dog.
Oh.
I was gonna say I have a cute cat. I named him Mr. Sparklebutt.
Do we have any aliens in your stories, Wes, or is it all Earthlings doing things?
Well, it depends on which series you're talking about. They're all humans, but they're on different planets, and they have completely different customs and cultures. There are weird animals that I put over there, like there's no dogs on Beta Earth, but there are all these oddball things that are there just to let you know that you're reading a science fiction book.
Like what? What's an example of one of your oddball creatures?
Oh, it's that thing with the eye. There's this one creature, I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head. It rises out of the seawater with this one bulbous eye that glares at you with this row of razor teeth, and he's always interested in finding things to eat. They can zap up out of the water and eat birds.
Wow.
Things like that, Oh, the caulks. Everybody loves the caulks. They're in a story that I'm working on now that I haven't put out yet, where they walk around rivers and they stir up mud and things like that. They've got 6 legs and scoop up stuff out of rivers and creeks so they can eat it, and that becomes a plot point in one story. Things like that. But well, there are mutants that start popping up, and there are with special abilities to a point. Although I try to keep it pretty grounded. I'm interested in the cultures that my main character, Malcolm, the blind alien, has to encounter. And then as his family and his tribe grows, they keep having to move around the planet. So the thing for me is creating different, they're all the same kinds of people, but they have different attitudes, different taboos, different expectations. It comes from one thing I got out of Star Trek. I love Star Trek. Do not get me wrong. Star Trek crap all over this house and autograph things. But one thing that always drove me crazy is that every time Picard or Kirk or whatever would sail around the planet, there'd be 2 leaders to talk to at most. One person could speak for a planet, or maybe 2 if they got some kind of contention, and that's about it. Wait a minute, most of the, like ours, would be more complex than that.
Yeah.
It would just talk to the head of the UN or talk to Trump. Oh, God.
Yeah, I think I would always say, like, this race of aliens is this way. And it's like, but there must be billions of them. Yes, I also love Star Trek, but that is as an anthropologist, I think like that.
I figure that it's just there is just like the state here, but they land and they talk to the leader and they're like, oh yeah, I'm totally the guy who's in charge here. Like every planet they land on, there's one dude who's like, it's me. And he's basically a plumber. He's just some guy, and he's like, yeah, I'm in charge.
From a writing perspective, though, I get why they did that.
Yeah,
Can you imagine, like, being like, we just found a planet?
No,
and then go into like the bureaucracy, and they're like, okay, well, you got to talk to this guy and fill out a form, and it's like,
Right,
that episode of Star Trek is not me.
And then the Enterprise is like, just like, okay, we're gonna leave this one alone.
Yeah,
Bye.
like, this one looks like it's like the DMV of space. I don't want to talk about it.
You know what, though?
But that is one reason that I liked DS9. I mean, I like all of them. I like them for different reasons, but DS9, you really got to know Bajor really, really well. And I liked that, diving into one planet for a while. But I actually consider it a personal triumph. I have gotten my parents now to watch Next Generation, and they love it. And I'm so pleased. They're not sci-fi people, so I've been working on them for years, and they finally are watching it. It makes me very happy.
Well, behind times.
Okay. So another really interesting thing to me about sci-fi and world building specifically is language. If you needed to invent new words or, maybe whole new languages, I don't know. But yeah, did you need to invent vocabulary in order to help build your world?
One thing that I'm most proud of is I created whole different dialects for the speakers to Earth. I made it a lot more active instead of I don't know, I know not, and things like that. And found kinds of ways to tighten them up. And the ladies who come from the poorer classes speak more pidgin English type, and those from the more economically advanced classes have a little better range of phrasing and vocabulary. But I worked really, really hard on that on the first 4 books. Make them sound different. It wasn't just a vocabulary, that's one thing, but if you're going to be an alien, sound alien.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't. No, I mean, there's a couple of, you got wilds and breads, and then there's a couple of like slurs that get used. I basically stole that from J.K. Rowling, I didn't use mug blood, but it's kind of the same idea.
Yeah.
But otherwise, not really any language changes.
Yeah, so because I'm within the sort of timeline of our actual world. It's not an off-world kind of a book. It's just modern technology in the same timeline. So I did spend a lot of time kind of evolving certain phrases and things. And like, for instance, there's a lot of scenes where there's virtual reality. It's not a big part of the story, but they have it because there's virtual reality. And they just say things like, oh, they're verting. It's just like I tried to take words that that do what words do, which is contract or change or do whatever. And I have a glossary or a list of dictionary that I keep, a running dictionary that probably has, I don't know, about 60 or 70 words and their usage and meaning, so I could be consistent throughout the book and hand it to my editors and things like that. But I didn't spend a lot of time like changing dialects or doing things. There's a couple turns of phrase and things like the word systemic, and it means truth. And so whenever they would say things like, "Hey man, is that real?" They would say, "Is that systemic?" Just little tiny things here and there. But generally speaking, I didn't want to, I look, could you walk down the street, I don't know, 200, 300 years ago and people are speaking English and understand them? And you probably could. Like, it's not so different. It's just some neologisms, I think is what they call the new words and things like that. And so I did a fair amount of that, but tried to keep it on the down low.
Yeah, I really, really loved the 100, the series, the 100. But my only beef with it was how much the language drifted in only about 100 years. Between the people in space and the people on Earth. The people on Earth were almost incomprehensible. I mean, they were clearly speaking English words, but it had drifted so far. And again, like with my anthropology background, like, yeah, there's language drift, but that was really far.
Things between Johnson and Shakespeare.
And so I'm always thinking of that, like, how much would a culture really change in this much time, or how much language would really change? Some is the answer.
Yeah. So another question.
In the original Old English. It's a lot of fun.
Another question I love to ask world builders is, what do people in your world do for fun?
So in Warehouse Dreams, again, it's contemporary. So they watch movies, read books and that type of thing. Go out and eat. There's, some bar scenes and that type of thing. The breads are really put up on this high pedestal. And so there's a lot of celebrity gossip and a lot of like following it around, and, they're celebrities. So there's definitely a subset of people that kind of try to follow them. And, there's a paparazzi. And, yeah, exactly. There's a great scene where some of the Wilds are, using the media to track one of their friends who's a bread. And it's just this great scene of like, oh my gosh, well, so-and-so put up this gossip scene, and, there's this picture, and, it's, I don't want to give too much away, but, there's this picture, and, all this gossip blogger is saying this, and, they're saying that, and, oh, let's pull up this other picture from here. And there's this obsession with a lot of these breads from these very, very rich families. So that's, one thing that they do for fun.
What about you, Chris? What do people do for fun in your world?
It's actually one of the main parts of my book is that they don't do anything. One of the problems that is happening in my book is that, we all create art and we do the things that we do. A lot of it, I wouldn't say it's, we all have this kind of need of solving some internal problem or whatever it is. And because in this world, the system has solved everyone's problems, one of the main things that they have that's the problem of the book is that there's nothing to do. And so they do read and they do watch shows and things like that, but they're all algorithmically generated. And so like, it's this weird thing where the books that you read, for example, are perfect. Like they really match your life and your mood and everything perfectly, and they're generated in real time, but they don't, they're always just interacting with your current emotions as opposed to affecting your emotions. The way, like, you read a book and you're like, oh, I never thought of it that way. I never saw it that way. It's just kind of almost replaying. There's a scene where Mike, who's one of the guys, starts to read a book and he's like, if this is a book about a guy getting on a train, which it is, he's like, I can't read it. It's so pertinent to my specific moment in time. And that's true of the shows, that like the TV shows, and they have these different algorithmic generators of content. And so everyone is really, really full of ennui and boredom, and mostly they do drugs.
Okay. Interesting. Really interesting. Yeah. It's sort of like, if the whole, they ask you to accept the cookies, right? So they can advertise you things that you actually want, but it's sort of that to the extreme, right? It's tapping into your brain and giving you too much.
And if nobody's poor everyone's pretty poor, but not very poor, and nobody's really hungry, and everyone who has a job, like everything's kind of taken care of at a base level so that nobody is struggling enough to want to make any good art. So, or music or whatever, like they just don't do anything. And it's horrible. That's actually the central problem of the book. Life is horrible when everything's perfect.
I love it. What about you, Wes? What do people do for fun?
Well, there's a lot of different things, but that kind of gets to a plot point that I start in book 2, where my blind alien goes over and he discovers that he's got all these wives and kids and he's got to support them. How's he going to do that? So he reaches into memory and he starts, well, not creating, but taking all of our Earth games and introducing them to the other planet. Chess and checkers and dominoes and, volleyball, you name it. He builds an empire of, I guess you could say plagiarizing all of the games that we know very well on Alphabet they never heard of over there. And then they start picking it up, start doing human chess pieces and things. Well, we do that here too, but they really pick up on these games, and that's a big change for their planet that he introduces.
Interesting. Cool. All right. Well, so now this timing's pretty perfect. I wanted to do the second half of the session talking about sort of your process for world building. What goes through your head, what kind of decisions you need to make. So do you do a lot of research? Do you just sort of like spring out of your head? Like, what's your process like just in general?
I think I'm a spring out of your head kind of person. I really did it. I really, Warehouse Dreams really is soft sci-fi. I did not really want to get into the whole, like, you tweak this gene and it causes this and da-da-da-da-da. But I did find I had to put parameters in place. I couldn't have everybody all of a sudden, can be, or put limitations in. I had to put limitations in, like, for example, the teleportation, not everybody can teleport and not everyone has the practicing to do that, because that would be too much. That would be too easy. Everyone could just jump everywhere they wanted to and everything else. Same with telepathy as well. I had to make it where some characters are really, really strong at telepathy and others aren't. And I did that intentionally because when they're talking telepathically, you're using italics, and that's exhausting to read. So I just didn't want to create a world where everything's in italics. But then I also had to have this I had to really be very intentional when I had scenes with multiple telepaths in it, because telepaths have the ability to talk to one person, or they could talk to everybody in the room, or they could only talk to a couple of people and ignore others. So that really makes writing the dialogue very, very challenging to do. It would be. And make it so that you're not like, oh, well, so-and-so's only talking to so-and-so here. But that is what we would do as humans, because we're jerks. And of course, if we had the ability to have one conversation over here and then be like, by the way, did you see how so-and-so stressed right now? We totally would do that. So I would say that was probably my biggest challenge, was kind of trying to figure out how to write that dialogue.
I thought I heard a yeah from Chris when I asked about research.
Well, I mean, no. Well, it depends what you mean by research. So, my story, it's a very rural story, as it turns out, just as it happened. And so I had a topography in mind. Like the first scene that I wrote is this young woman hiking through what turned out to be the Prower Valley, but and that scene, the topography of that valley came from a very specific area in Montana that I happened to be driving through that was in my mind. And then the biome, sort of the way that the plants and stuff, it all comes from central Washington, so the sagebrush areas and stuff. So I kind of took central Washington and imposed it upon the topography of Montana, and that kind of was the thing. And so I did a lot of stuff, like when I'm describing plants or something, I'll go, okay, well, what kinds of things would actually be here? So I did a lot of that sort of niddly research and stuff. When it came to the technology, I mean, I work at Microsoft and things like that. So I actually did a lot of it's also very light sci-fi. Like I don't get really deep into the sci-fi, but I had to understand for myself how it would work. And so I pulled out Visio and I drew diagrams and data flow systems and I did all this stuff and I wrote long descriptions, like basically technical specifications of the things that I'm using, which I did not include in the book at all because I figured that's kind of boring and no one wants to read it.
Your readers will thank you.
But I wanted to make sure that if I said, well, the AI did this and the thing did that and it was a transcranial stimulation, if I said something, I wanted it to be believable and consistent. And things like when you're using verting or you're doing virtual reality to like go someplace or whatever, I would do things like, you can it was like impacting the optic nerve, for example. It's not something you see. It's not like goggles or something. It's like you touch a contact and it actually sends an electric signal that impacts your optic nerve. So it's writing directly to your brain effectively, which is, and so when I do things like that, and then like you lift your fingers off and you're no longer contacted, there's not going to be a retinal glow of something. Like it just shuts off because it's not a chemical reaction in the retina. And so I did a lot of that stuff just to kind of understand how it would do and be, so that when I describe certain scenes, they are internally and technically consistent. But again, I don't really want to put that in a book because it's boring enough that I have to work with technology all day at work. I don't want to like subject my poor parents to having to read that. So, but I did do a fair amount of that kind of research. So,
and Wes, it sounds like you probably did a lot of research as well.
Constantly. Of course, I used to, I cut my teeth on writing nonfiction. I used to write encyclopedia articles for all kinds, especially encyclopedias. And my first 4 books were nonfiction. They were all research. Now, when I started the sci-fi stuff, I didn't really research for a bit, but it started to get more and more prevalent. That's just as Chris was talking about. There's things I needed to be able to explain or understand and try to make them believable, give it for verisimilitude. I think the one piece that kind of surprised me most was when I sent some of the characters from Beta Earth to Serapent Earth. One of the characters gets his sight back. He's been blind for 20 years. And all of a sudden, in the next dimensional jump, he gets his eyes back. Well, what would happen? Well, I researched that, and it wasn't as pleasant as you might think. There's a lot of psychological and physical changes that you have to go through. It takes a while to adapt to light and dimension, being able to perceive things and put them properly. You end up walking into stuff. For all these years, you relied on the other senses. I was really stunned. That was one of the pieces of research that really knocked me out. But there's all kinds of things throughout that were, yes, researched, because I want to make parallels and analogs. And no, of course, I drew from my own background. I knew a lot of stuff because I know a lot of stuff.
Yeah, that was actually going to be one of my next questions is, does anybody have real life experience that informed your sci-fi world building? And I think, Wes and Chris, you definitely touched on that with your jobs.
Yeah, I mean, a little bit. So I don't work in like artificial intelligence. I just work in a technical field and I know how technology just generally works. But I do know people who do machine learning and things like that, I use them as beta readers. Or electrician, like right now, my current book, I have something that I need an electrical engineer to work through some problem. And so I put it out on my Facebook, hey, do you guys, any electrical engineers want to talk to me? And so I got on Zoom calls with electrical engineers and talked to them and worked through plot points with them and stuff like that. But yeah, I mean, working in technology it informs a lot of the how of things work. But yeah, and I talk to people that I know from work about various things is kind of how it works. I didn't, just like, you said, Theresa, you're saying it was light sci-fi or whatever. My book, like, I didn't even know it was a sci-fi book for 90 pages. Like, and I didn't want it to be front and center, even though a lot of the environment has to do with this AI. I didn't want it to be all, like a lot of sci-fi books, especially hardcore, it's like, it's all about the technology and how the technology works. And I wanted my book to be much more about humans and how humans interact in a world where technology does its thing. And so my work and the things that I do for a living didn't play into it as much as you might think. It's almost more circumstantial.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I actually really struggled, giving warehouse dreams a genre, because, you say sci-fi and, what pops into your head is, usually space. It's like, no, this is contemporary, and it's with telepaths and psychokinetics, which there's not a lot of books out there about them. And so I kind of landed on sci-fi because it's not urban fantasy, urban fantasy, it's vampires and werewolves and all the rest of that.
Right.
So I kind of said soft sci-fi. It's definitely a challenge.
It is, especially this market.
An interesting distinction that I came across. So I actually wrote a reference book for steampunk. That's called the Steampunk Handbook. That's actually free ebook. But so for my own self, because I was writing about a person who could see ghosts. I was really interested in the difference between supernatural and paranormal.
Mm-hmm.
And how do you draw the line between the two? Because really what it came out to be is like the supernatural is the fantasy part and paranormal is the sci-fi part of the same, sometimes the exact same thing, but it's whether or not it is knowable. So like miracles are supernatural. You can't really have a sci-fi miracle. There has to be some reason. Even if it's not totally apparent to the person who witnesses it, there's some underlying reason behind it. We're so like, gods and miracles and fairies and things, that's supernatural versus paranormal. Because what to do with my medium who, she can talk to ghosts. And I actually borrowed bad science from the 19th century. Was my approach. That was my big research that I did.
Were there vapors?
What?
Yeah. Were there vapors involved? Vapors and bad?
No, but it was this really fun thing. It's this obscure German researcher, and he coined this whole idea of, it's called Odic force. He named for Odin because it's this all-permeating force. But like he came up with his theory because he was studying sleepwalking and believed that the moon let off a certain kind of energy that made people do things and stuff. And so like that's where I actually go for a lot of my science. Is I borrow terrible science quackery from the 19th century and then run with it, because it does have its own internal logic.
It does, yeah.
Yeah.
Like it's still a reason.
That's brilliant. No, it's good. It's quack fiction. It's good.
Quack fiction.
I like that. We just created a new genre.
Let's see. So we've covered some of the other questions in a way already. Just in terms of process and how you work. Chris mentioned he's got a glossary of terms. But some people keep like these big Bibles of their characters and things like that. Does anybody do that, or you just keep it all in your brain? What's your process for that?
Oh, I have to write it down.
I'll write it down too.
Yeah. So I have a character list, and it's really basic. It just, eye color, hair color, because sometimes I forget that. Abilities, especially for very, very tertiary characters where you're like, what color was her hair? So I do have to have a list, and I tend to forget, because I'm working on the sequel for Warehouse Dreams. I tend to forget what rooms and the configuration of rooms. I find when I'm writing, they kind of morph in my head, and then I have to go back and be like, oh, there's not a staircase there, or this room didn't have a window, and I have my character looking out a window. Dang it! So I have to have that stuff figured out.
Yeah. Do you draw that stuff?
I do, not well, but I have to sketch it out.
It needs to be all right. The window here. Yeah.
Right.
I'm really sort of anal about the shapes of my rooms and the sizes of towns and what's on what corner of what block, and so I draw really bad drawings of it, but I have maps and I have things and the characters, and The thing I wish I was better at that I try to be good at is understanding my characters and their motivations and things like that, so that when I get into a conversation with two characters, I could say, she wouldn't really say that. Like, what's her actual motivation, and do that. And I'm getting better at sort of that and being consistent with characters. For a long time, I would like start off and I would say like, this person is, sad about this or whatever. And so when I would start off a conversation, especially when I was editing, I would write at the top, like, here's what this character wants to get out of this conversation, so that I wouldn't lose it. Because I will just start typing and having a conversation and then look back at it and go, yeah, no, that's not really what he would do or she would do, and things like that. So I do keep that. And I've got character sheets and pictures. I looked up did Google searches and look up people like, and find the person that I want that character to look like. And then I just paste it into my Scrivener thing. So I can always look back and go, oh, he's got a beard. It's a short beard. He's got gray hair. He's tall. Like I do that kind of stuff so that I don't lose the character, and I just keep pictures of people around. I would love to go to those people, those pictures are in my book, and say, by the way, you are Aaron in my book. Like that would be, you're in a book. Did you know that? I have no idea who you are. You're a Getty image, but there you are. You're in a book. So.
Now try being blind and concoct all these descriptions.
Yeah.
It's my constant challenge, because I just pull stuff out of the sky because I have no idea what anything looks like. I haven't seen a color in decades.
My characters don't have faces, honestly, in my head. Like, I kind of, they have hair color if I need them to. If I need, in my second novel in this series, I had a bunch of different women that were all burlesque dancers. And so I needed a way to differentiate them, but I didn't care what color anybody's hair or eyes were. It was just a thing that I needed to throw in so the reader could tell them apart.
The reader, yeah.
They rarely have faces. Like, I will picture people doing things. They don't have faces. And I don't know if that's a weird me thing. I know other people do, like they'll build, or like they'll have Pinterest pages where they'll put, I've tried to do that, and I just, I don't know, they just don't have faces as far as I
I'm there with you too. Well, and I write first person, and so much of it is, we were talking about characters and kind of their motivations and that type of thing. My favorite thing about first person is, first of all, it's unreliable narrator, and second of all, as the author, I have to understand what that other character wants out of it, even if my main character does not know. And that's kind of the funnest part of it. But in terms of characters not having faces, in Warehouse Dreams, my main character, she sees people's shields, so kind of their blocking ability for telepathy, and she sees them in colors and shapes. And so that was really fun to build, because as we talk, we control our facial features really well, but you can't necessarily control that your shields all of a sudden turn red because you got pissed. So, kind of playing with that idea too was a lot of fun. What did you say?
Full body mood rings.
Yes, it is. That's exactly it. It's a full body mood ring. And so knowing what other characters were thinking and feeling in various scenes was vital to that, so that she can kind of get that information and kind of manipulate it a little bit. But she's not necessarily getting the whole story either. So me as the author, I had to know that. So it's fun. It's a very, very I think it's a very multi-layered book.
So,
I used to do.
I want to get in on that, because there's so many things that are so similar. One, I don't see faces either.
Okay.
And all the AIs in my book are actually, their emotions are color coded, which when you said that about the shields, I'm like, me too. So I have a whole list of the different colors of the AIs and what they mean. And so as the AIs are talking, they emote by changing colors in various ways. And so I'm like, I'm right there with you. That's exactly what I did. And so I have a whole, in my glossary, it's got in fact, I have a blog post about all the different colors of the AIs in the books and what they mean at different times and the things they're doing, and whether they're sad or happy or angry or looking so I did that too. So I couldn't let it go. I was like, oh, that's
no, that's cool.
That's cool. Yeah.
I was just going to mention, because you were talking about getting inside the heads of the characters and making sure you're consistent. When I used to do theater in college, one of my favorite exercises that we did was we would have two sets of people learn the same scene. So 2 girls and 2 boys for a boy-girl scene. And then we would have 2 of them do the lines, and the other 2 stood behind them, and then had to fill in the space with what their thinking was to get them to the next line. So whoever, you know, was actually delivering the lines had to wait until the person behind them got there. And it was a really interesting exercise to figure out what the characters were thinking.
Because at the end of the day, we're all liars.
Yeah.
We are.
Yeah, there's a lot of subterfuge. Yeah, I tend to, as part of my process, I like to write abstracts for my chapters.
Yeah.
And so sometimes they're just bullet points, or sometimes they're full sentences. But this idea of like what needs to be accomplished, what is this person trying to accomplish in this scene, is definitely something that goes into my abstracts and helps me as I'm plotting, you know, and I'll maybe do 10 chapters at a time. I won't do the whole book. And then, you know, but I'll do chunks of them. And that's really helpful as part of my process for, keeping track of what people are thinking and why they're doing things.
It has occurred to me that character development in writing, so again, this is my first book, and so I learned a lot about just writing while writing it, and acting has a lot to do with, you know, I'm not an actor, but I know enough to know what actors say about acting. And it's like one of these things where you're getting in someone's headspace and trying to be there, and like what would their body position be like if they were upset about something in that particular way, and not just always saying they were angry, they were sad, like describing their body position and their face. I don't see faces like their eyebrows, but I do talk a lot about the construction of their emotions on their face. And so I do, it's like acting in this, I would assume, not being an actor, that it's very similar to being an actor in that way, body position and motivation and things like that. So I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, I learned a lot from doing theater.
Yeah.
I recommend anybody give community theater a try once we get back to being able to do it, because it's wonderful. Even just like for the risk-taking aspect of it, it reinforces the positive risk-taking that is really important for writers to have. You know, to have the confidence to put things out there. Because theater people are some of the nicest, most supportive people in the world. And I miss community theater. That's actually one bummer about living in Germany, is I haven't gotten to do theater in 3 years. So we'll move back to the US at some point. This is a temporary thing. So I'm looking forward to doing that again someday. Wes, did you get a chance to weigh in on how you keep track of everything? And do you have notes?
Back in my head, I was talking about the fact that I do things differently with my Beta Earth books, because I haven't, think of the Beatles anthology, or really any oral history, when you're getting all the multiple perspectives told by the different members of the band or whatever it might be. In my books, they're all told from all these different perspectives. Malcolm, the blind guy from Alpha Earth over there, and you have all these other different women and other characters, and you hear what they think about things. So how you don't really hear about what somebody looks like from their perspective, you hear about it from what the other people think she looks like, or looks like, or behaves like. So you get all of these layers of perspectives that build and build and build as the series progresses.
And so, Theresa, you mentioned that you like to write first person. So I also wanted to ask a little bit about first versus third and omniscient, and like, you know, do people have favorites, or do you have something that you will never do? How do you feel about POV?
I've tried. So I'm working on a project with a friend. We're writing a creative nonfiction book about the Star of India, which is a boat in San Diego. And so I'm writing that in third person, and man, I am struggling. It's just not how my brain operates. And I've had to like go back and be like, dang it, I wrote this in first person. Let me go back and redo it. I love first person. Well, I have a degree in psychology, and I really feel like first person really lets you dig into that layer of the psychology of what's going on and why people are saying what they're saying, and doing what they're doing. And then the other thing I love about it, and it's just me being kind of perverse, first person is an unreliable narrator. They're liars because we lie to ourselves. And so it's really fun to kind of play with that. And I've written short stories from other characters' perspectives. And I'm really playing around with that, where my main character's thinking and feeling one thing, but somebody else is like, no, 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 you're not getting it.
Yeah.
Because again, when a good first person is an unreliable narrator.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Your cattail just looks like a little tentacle, kind of like.
I know. I tried to shoo him away. He keeps like joining and disappearing, and then like he was on the back of my chair. And yeah.
My dog's not down here. He's usually down here with me. So
what about you guys, Wes and Chris? Do you have
go ahead,
favorite?
Wes.
Do we have what?
Do you have a favorite POV, or do you have a kind of point of view that you avoid like the plague?
Well, I wouldn't do second person for anything. First 4 books were all that oral history, thing. You hear from one character for a while, then the next character for a while. And I got to the 5th book and thought, no, let's do third person now. No, let's do first person. But keep it to one character, so it'll be something different. And then in the next 2 books after that, it's all third person, because I wanted to try it differently. I wanted to just do it differently. I think it's easier for readers if you have just one perspective. I come to learn that as time went by. So I've done, the overlapping oral history, and then a one narrator book, and then a third person, and I'm pretty much going to be in third person for a while with these 2 different series I got going. Anything I wouldn't do? I don't know.
How sort of zoomed in are you? Is it a close third, or is it more like far away and more oblique?
You mean omniscient?
Yeah, I mean, you can have a distant third that isn't omniscient, though. Also, just in general.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. I'm just thinking where I guess it's pretty much omniscient in a sense, because I have one scene set here, and then all of a sudden you're over on the other side of the river, and then you're somewhere else. So I guess in that sense, but each scene is pretty much one camera scenes, I guess you could say, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I'm the same. I do. I think that I do a fairly tight third person, and so I look at each character like a camera, just like what Wes said, and so it allows for a little bit of ability to be descriptive of environments beyond what the characters understand. But I stay pretty tight to even to the point of the language and the description of what's going on around them is. I try to be good about the types of things that a character like that would experience in their own mind. So if I'm using a metaphor that's, I don't know, say highly technical, and it's from the perspective of a 12-year-old girl, I might say, yeah, let's go more with a metaphor that is, about trees or birds or something, And so I stick like that, and I never, so it's third person, but I can never see anything in the room that the character can't see. I never like behind her was a thing. Like I never do that. It's always from their perspective, but it's not a first person narrative.
Yeah.
I like the single camera. I think the single camera is a good way.
Single camera, but it also allows for a little bit of untrustworthy narrator because again, it's from their perspective, and so it's only as good as their own perception of things, which is actually a massive theme of my book. So as you're talking, Theresa, you're really fun to look as you talk about psychology and the way that. We're all liars to ourselves in certain ways. Non-malicious liars. We're just are wrong about, how it is. And that's a huge part of my book as well, is that again, not a liar, but internal lying is a huge part of my book.
In the platonic sense of the term.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, no, the series I was talking about with the Gaslight Fantasy series with the medium, she is a liar. She's a con woman, so she's a straight up liar, but then also lies to herself about her own motivation. There's always a different reason that she gives for what, and then it takes a while to dig out, oh wait, no, actually I'm afraid, and things like that. But so I tend to use third person in novels and first person in short stories. And I don't know if it's just, I don't know, I feel more comfortable with that viewpoint, I guess, for a longer work. Yeah. And my first person stuff tends to be like deathbed confession, or like there's a woman who is abducted by aliens and she's the only one who can hear them. That was actually, so the language thing, the language question, I meant to mention, yeah, that was one language thing that I did, was I had these telepathic aliens, but they only use nouns. And so they wouldn't be like, I want to eat a sandwich. They would be like, desire, sandwich. That was a really fun language challenge for myself. That was, part of this.
Wax down some wordiness too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
It should blow those word counts.
Yeah. I hate those.
Okay, well, so my last world building related question is, did any of you encounter problems, like difficulties, either with how the facts work, or did you write yourself into a corner or a paradox at any point in your world that you had to solve in a creative way?
I think people, so again, this goes back to limiting people's abilities. So I made it so that it's very really, if you really think about being able to control your environment around you mentally, you could kill somebody by closing their windpipe. So I had to again, that was limiting people's abilities and making it so that little fine-tuned things people really couldn't do. That was too much for them. Because, every time I would think about it, I was like, oh, why don't they just, use their ability to do X, Y, Z? And, problem solved. And it's but no, that's an important plot point. So yeah, there had to be some sort of limiting factor.
Yeah, this is why I like Batman a lot better than Superman, is because right, once Superman figured out how to turn back time, why wasn't that just the answer for everything?
Yeah. I don't like superheroes because it's too damn easy. It's it's just uncomplex. It's I have a thing for that. Even Batman can take a punch a lot more than you probably should be able to.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Wes.
Did you?
One thing that moves up for my stuff is my 6th book was ones when I brought the 2nd generation to our planet, and I kind of had to world build what we would be like in 20 years. After global warming has done a whole lot of devastation, and after all those plagues have come through that have really wiped out whole towns and civilizations and everything, and I have to move the characters around. For the first time, I had to use known geography, known topography, and when I set these guys up on their escape, and they have to go through here and there, it's in a different, it's Earth, and it's what's left of Earth in a way. That's a whole different kind of creation than if you're making up an entire world from scratch.
So was sea level higher? Was that something you had to figure out?
Some places, yeah, coast had, but that was part of it. It is amazing. I was one of those research things where what would it be like up in Vancouver and British Columbia? What would be the things that would happen, but on vegetation. And it was just bottomless pit of things that you wouldn't think about. If there's an earthquake, would you think about a refrigerator walking across the floor and falling out the door? They do that just because of the vibrations, apparently. So there's a lot of little things like that I was glad to see because they made things interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. As far as paradoxes or things like that, or work yourself into a corner, in Systemic, my first, the book that we're talking about right now, there wasn't a lot of that. My wife calls BS on a lot of things, and so but those things turned out to be pretty cool. I knew the answer, but I'm okay, I got to describe that in such a way that it makes sense. And
yeah,
so there was a lot of those things that need to be fleshed out. In my current book, which is the follow-up to that one, it's a couple generations again, because I don't like talking about time. And everything's kind of falling apart. And, my wife, again, calling BS on something. She's like, no, that's not how that would work. After that much time, they would totally turn on, all the tech would come back and all this stuff because it's been a while. And I'm like, no, it won't. And we argue about it. And of course she's right, because she's like that. But that actually made me build an entire sort of history and explanation for it that borders on religious sects and things like that. And actually, she was totally right in that the story and the environment that the next book is in, there's basically people that are anti-technology entirely. And then there's a whole other thing that there's a separation between them. They don't even know really about each other, but they're just kind of chugging along at this, like they actually have rebuilt and everything's just fine. But there's these other people that are basically like Luddites that are opposed to anything that even remotely resembles technology because they don't want the same things to happen again. And so that was a paradox that she was like poking at me and saying BS, 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 to where I'm like, oh, I've got this great idea to do this thing. And so that
enough Star Trek
experience. What's that?
He doesn't watch enough Star Trek because that's a trope that appeared more than once.
Oh yeah, we're not as creative as we like to think we are. Let's just get there. But walks help with your wife. Go on a walk with your wife and have her poke at your ideas. You'll come up with some great things. So,
do either of you, Wes or Theresa, do you have a sounding board that helps you figure out your worlds?
Sometimes I'll use other writer friends, like the Semi-Sages and that type of thing.
Well, I got a writer's critique group I belong to. In fact, we got a session today where you send in passages and everybody comments on each other.
Mm-hmm.
That sounding board. When my wife was alive, she really threw in a lot of things that shaped the second book. Like the tribe has moved and they're all, they got all these wives and all these kids and everything. She said, don't they ever play tricks on each other? Don't the kids ever get underfoot and things I wouldn't have thought about? Well, I'm glad she did, so I integrated that into the story.
It's always good to we were saying how solitary writing novels can be, but it can be so important to also have somebody that you can bounce things off of and get critiques.
My 13-year-old daughter, who when I first wrote my first book, I guess she was at that time probably about 11 or so, and she would do things like, you need a dog in there. And so I was like, put a dog in there. You need a snake in this thing. Or like, so she actually, some of my favorite parts of my book were my 12-year-old daughter saying, hey, you should do this. And it's a 12-year-old. Like, it really added this real interesting depth to the story and a bunch of ideas where she was like this system, this AI, and she would say, it sounds like it's sad. And I'm like, that's actually pretty cool. Or for a while I got out of this, but where I didn't have anybody but the main character didn't have names. They just had my wife, my friend, like they were just positions. They were like roles, and there was a reason for that. And she's actually the one who gave me the reason for it. She's like, it's because of this, that, and the other thing. And I'm like, that's really smart. And then later my editor's like, you can't do that. No one's going to read a book where nobody has names. And also nobody spoke. Like everything was like, they said something about this. There was no quotes, like direct quotes.
No actual dialogue.
And my editor said, yeah, you can't do that. So she's like, it's a great idea. You're really smart. Don't do that. Everyone will hate you. So but my daughter was a big part of some of the better ideas in my book actually came from her. So.
Oh, that's really cool. That's awesome.
So when's she writing her book?
She starts them all the time. Actually, she's a fantastic writer, but then she gets she gets a little bit distracted after about 10 pages and gives up. But she reads a lot of like juvenile fiction, Wings of Fire, dragon books, things like that. And then she writes stories, and I'm like, did you just copy that from the book? She's like, nope. And I'm like, that is seriously better than those books. She's
that is confidence.
Better writer than me, but she doesn't have the stamina that I do. So she's got some stuff to learn about stamina. 13-year-old.
That'll come with time. Yeah. All right. Well, this has been fantastic chatting with all of you about world building. I just want to give everyone a chance to say your name and the titles of your book that you were talking about today. We'll also drop some links in the Facebook Live in the event in case people want to check you out. So I will start. My name is Phoebe Darqueling. I was your host today. Thank you. My series is called The Mistress of None. The first book is No Rest for the Wicked. And so it's a gas lamp fantasy book about a medium who is also a con woman. And that's me. You can find me on phoebedarqueling.com. And I actually have a ton of world building interviews that I do on phoebedarqueling.com on my blog. So if you like this kind of stuff, a lot of these questions came from those interview series, and I'll drop a link to that as well in the Facebook Live for everybody.
Oh, okay, I'll go. I was like, are we like pointing? Are we? So I'm Theresa Halverson. I'm the author of Warehouse Dreams. Oh, dang it. I'm the author of Warehouse Dreams, which you can find on Amazon. You can find me on my website, theresaauthor.com, and then semisagesofthepages.com for our podcast as well.
Okay, I'll go. My name is Chris Lodwig, and you can find me on chrislodwigauthor.com. The novel that I'm promoting is called Systemic. It is a sci-fi future world, AI takes over the world book, but really it's about the three characters who are all making their way to a small town in the middle of the high desert for some reason that they're not quite sure of. And it's all about the reasons that they're going there and what it has to do with humans and their lack of motivation in the world, and how the system is going to help solve that problem for them. And you can get that on Amazon. You can get it on Audible, and I believe you can get it on iTunes as well. And my Facebook page is Chris Lodwig Author.
I guess it's over to me.
Yeah.
I've got two websites. One is all sci-fi stuff, drwesleybritton.com. Another one is spywise.net, where all my spy stuff is. I have a Facebook page that's Beta Earth Chronicles. I have another Facebook page that's on my book reviews. So I did want to mention that I crank out book reviews like crazy for bookpleasures.com, and they get reposted all kinds of places. And if anybody needs reviews, well, talk to me after the show is over sometime. If you guys do newsletter swaps, I do a lot of that. I do have Twitter. I do have a YouTube channel with all kinds of weird things there. What else do you want to know?
The Beta Earth Chronicles, is that available on Amazon?
Oh, yes. Yeah. And well, the first 6 books are also available at bearmanormedia.com. They were my publisher up until I decided to go indie with book 7 because I got more control. And Ben, the publisher of Bear Manor, doesn't tend to put his fiction out in hardcover. So there's really only 3 of the books that are out in print that you can get softcover, and all the rest are strictly ebooks. For now, one by one, they're all going to be coming out in print as we move along, and as I add new books to the the overall concept, because now it's gone all over the place. It's fun.
All right. So authors, stick around on the Zoom. We'll have a little chat when we're done. I'm going to go off Facebook Live right now. Thank you so much for being my guest today as part of LitCon. I hope you had as much fun as I did.
Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you very much for the interview, for the panel. It's great.
Okay, our live stream is done. That was great.
That was fun.
Huzzah.
That was fun.
I should stop my recording though.